Hello, I'm Julieta, and in this video I'm going to read chapters 7, 8, and 9 from The Amber Giant. So what has happened so far? Well, Caroline found a stone doll at the Kathmandu market, and the doll spoke to her and said, "Do not wake up the giant." But her dad really wants to find the Amber Giant and wake him up, so Caroline's going with him. Remember, the giant's been asleep for 1,000 years. So, will they find the Amber Giant? Let's journey into the freezing cold, high Himalayan mountains to find out. After walking for 4 days, they were deep in the mountains. It got colder as they climbed. Snow came to her ankles, and she stepped high to clear it. Her new boots pinched, but at least her legs weren't tired. Caroline's new fleece, wool gloves, and hat felt thin. She wished she had 2 pairs of gloves. Their new guide, Pemba, had carried her much of the way. He was so strong. She was amazed to see him race ahead of her father, even with her on his back. But now he put her down to walk by herself. "Little one, you must move or you'll get cold." Pemba's grin was so big that she had to smile back. Her hands were numb and her feet felt sore, but it didn't matter. She was on a real adventure. The mountains were harsh and beautiful. Some of the paths came close to a drop. One wrong step could send her falling to the bottom. She couldn't wait to tell Sammy about the narrow paths and sheer drops. Her logbook was full of drawings of huge peaks and steep cliffs. The snow covering the rocky landscape was so bright she needed to wear her sunglasses. They were so high, it seemed like they were walking into the deep blue sky. They passed lakes so clear that clouds reflected in them. Around noon, they all stopped for some hot, buttery tea. "Thanks, Simba." Caroline gratefully took a metal cup of the thick tea, dusted snow off a cold rock, and sat down. "It's Pemba, not Simba," their guide told her. "Simba is a lion from a movie. I am a Sherpa, a guide." The Nepalese man laughed. "Sorry, Pemba." Caroline's face grew hot, though the rest of her was ice cold. It was hard to remember his name, but she was too cold to take her gloves off and write it in her logbook. Caroline shivered. "Are we almost there?" "Getting higher, girl getting colder," Pemba said, then looked at her dad. "I have another fleece you could wear," Dad said as he felt her cheek. "It's big, but you'll be warmer. We just have 1 more day before we get to the peak. I have to do some work tomorrow. After all, it is the climate survey that pays the bills." Her father held out an empty cup for a refill. "Does that mean I can sleep late?" Caroline asked. The sleeping bag was warm in the morning, and she hated getting out of it so early. They usually started walking just after dawn. "Yes, you can sleep in," Dad agreed. "Only I promised you would call Mom." The buttery tea left a yellow mustache on her dad's stubbly lip. Caroline made a face. Her mom was furious that she was on the expedition. All Mom did was worry about the snow and cold, so it was no fun to talk to her. "When do we get to the giants?" Caroline asked. Sadly, the lost drop of tea was gone. She quickly pulled off a glove and cleaned out the yellow film in the tin cup with her finger. Pemba shook his head. "You should forget this monster," the guide said. He looked directly at her dad. "Why?" Caroline asked. "He's the reason we came all the way up here. Why forget about the giants?" Pemba didn't answer. "We'll get there soon," Dad reassured her. He patted her arm and handed her a large fleece. It fit like a dress. The sleeves went past her hands. The blue material came down to her knees, but she felt warmer right away. "It's good, thanks." Caroline smiled at her dad. "That's my girl," Dad said and beamed back. "An explorer, just like her father." He threw a strong arm around her shoulders. "If you don't want the girl to become an icicle, we better keep walking," Pemba said. "If I carry her, she will freeze for sure. She walks too." Then he strode off, and they had to hurry to catch up with him. They walked for hours. Soon the sun was about to disappear behind a mountain peak. Pemba found a good place to pitch the tents. Dad helped set up camp, while Caroline rubbed her arms and shivered. Her legs were weak and tired. She just wanted to curl up in her sleeping bag for days. Her dad made her eat 2 protein bars and drink 2 cups of tea. Finally, she was allowed to sleep. It took only a few seconds before she found herself dreaming of the giant. "Release me," he moaned. The giant's eyes stared at her, brown and kind. He looked so sad and struggled against the rock. Caroline clutched the doll to her heart as she slept. When bright morning came, Caroline stretched her warm fingers and toes. Finally, she had time to herself and the energy to awaken the doll. "What is lifeless has life," she whispered to the little figure. The doll warmed up instantly. The heat felt good on her palm. "Brr, it's cold in here," the doll said. "We're in the mountains, near the giant," Caroline whispered. She didn't know if Pemba was near, and she didn't want him to hear. "Ah, I can feel it. I feel stronger," the doll stretched. "Well, that's good, right?" Caroline pulled the warm sleeping bag around her and the doll. "Not if you plan to wake the amber giants," the doll's blue eyes blinked. "Remember what I told you. It sleeps for a reason." "Why should we let him sleep?" Caroline asked. "What's so bad about waking him up?" Sudden hunger cramped her stomach, and she devoured a protein bar. 3 more were next to her sleeping bag. "I do not know," the doll said. "I only know doom follows the waking of the giants." The doll's eyes grew enormous and dominated its face. "My dad says we shouldn't listen to you," Caroline said as she unwrapped a second protein bar. "He says you're like voicemail, a message from the past." "I am alive," the doll told her. "I fear the giant, though I am part of him." "Will you return to stone if he wakes?" Caroline whispered. "I might not. I have had life so long, perhaps some of it is mine." The doll shivered. "I am too cold and must sleep again. If your father wakes the giant, will you promise me something?" "Maybe. What is it?" She swallowed the last bite of the bar. "Say the following words. Para en ras," the doll said. "Now you try." Para en ras. "Perfect!" The eyes and mouth of the doll grew round with surprise. "What does it mean?" Caroline asked. "Just say it." The doll yawned and stretched its little arms above its head. "I'm getting sleepy. Perhaps we will not meet again." "Wait, don't go," Caroline said, but it was too late. The doll's eyes disappeared, just as a cold rush of air startled her. Dad's red face pushed into the tent. Short, light brown hair showed on his cheeks and chin. "Just a couple more hours of surveying and we can go," Dad told her. "You ate 2 energy bars. Good. Eat 1 more, then call your mom." "Do I have to?" She frowned. "She is already angry. Don't get me in any more trouble, okay?" He grinned and pulled his face out of the tent, zipping it back up. Her hair was greasy, so she positioned the wool hat so none of her wet-looking curls would show. The Miranda Mom button was the favorite Skype contact on her dad's smartphone. She pressed it, and her mom's worried face instantly appeared. "Caroline, are you okay?" Her dark eyes searched through the screen. "Yes, I'm fine. See? Breakfast!" She held up a protein bar. "That's all you're eating?" She sounded near panic. "They're good enough, Mom," Caroline said. "I had 2 already, and there's Pemba's butter tea." She spoke through bites. Pemba, the guide? Her mom's eyes got closer to the screen. That's him, Caroline nodded. Where is he now? Mom's voice was getting higher, not a good sign. I don't know. Dad's out surveying, so maybe he's helping. You're alone out there? Her mom ran her hands through her hair, messing her curls up further. Mom, it's not like there's anyone around to bother us, Caroline pointed out. We're in the middle of nowhere. She moved the phone around so Mom could see the cozy orange tent around her. Outside our tent, it's just rocks and snow. It wasn't the right thing to say. Her mom's face paled. What was your father thinking? Mom said. Of all the crazy ideas. Mom, I'm fine. It's fun here. Sammy ran into the view, wearing a t-shirt with safari printed on it. We're having more fun than you, Sammy said. We rode an elephant. His freckled face filled the screen. What was it like? Caroline couldn't help smiling. He looked so happy. Smelly, why are you wearing a hat? Now she could only see one big blue eye. Because it's cold, she told him. Back up, I can't see your face. In the tent? It's cold in the tent? Mom pulled Sammy onto her lap. Her worried frown contrasted with Sammy's excited grin. Not really, Caroline said. It's just better with the hat on, that's all. Well, it looks dumb, Sammy shouted. You shouldn't wear a hat inside. Well, I like it, Caroline told him. Her new hat was almost too colorful, with blue, pink, red, and yellow stripes. Her new gloves had the same cheerful pattern. When are you coming back home? Mom's eyes got closer to the camera and showed up big on the screen. Caroline, if you want to come now, you just say the word. I'll send the police. Caroline nearly laughed out loud. We just need to do something here, then we'll turn around, Caroline said. Dad says it will only take 3 days to get home. Going down is faster. 3 more days with no real food. Mom's worried face filled the phone screen. What that man was thinking, I just don't know. Mom, I have to go, Caroline said. The milk tea is ready. Caroline had no idea if the tea was ready, but it seemed like a good way to get off the phone. Do you have any signs of altitude sickness? Mom asked. What? No. Nosebleed? Dizziness? Bye, Mom. Bye, Sammy, Caroline waved and watched Sammy spinning around while shouting, I'm dizzy, I'm dizzy, before she hung up. With a deep sigh, she decided to face the cold for some of the Sherpa's rich, buttery tea. Before she even climbed out of her sleeping bag, her father unzipped the tent. His face was flushed and his eyes shone. I found him. I found the Amber Giant. Chapter 8. He was bigger than she expected and darker. The giant towered over them, as tall as a house. His hands were the size and shape of large, hairy rocks. She couldn't see the giant's face. It was too high and was pointed at the mountain peaks in front of him. Its fur wasn't golden, but a muddy brown. Caroline leaned in close, wrinkling her nose at the smell. He's breathing, she whispered. Groaning and creaking came from its hairy chest. Why do you say that? Her dad whispered back. Listen! Caroline could clearly hear its lungs working, but her dad shook his head. I can't hear anything, Dad said. Their guide was back at the tents. He refused to get near the creature. Why is he so brown? Caroline asked. In the book, he's gold. Long, matted fur covered the giant's body. He's probably just dirty, Dad said, covered with 1,000 years of dust. Are you going to wake him? Caroline's voice shook with excitement. That's what we're here for. Dad rubbed his hands together, his breath quick. Caroline took the doll out from a pocket in her fleece and held it to her chest. I hope you don't die, she whispered to the doll. Ar adat, lechen adat, her dad's voice echoed. Nothing happened. Guess it didn't work, Dad said. Maybe my pronunciation is off. He opened his mouth to try again, but there was no need. The mountain rumbled. One of the giant's fists uncurled, and pieces of rock and stone crumbled away from it. A larger rock tumbled out from the wall when the giant bent his knee. Caroline clutched the doll tightly. "It's crumbling," Dad shouted. "We have to get clear of the rocks." The giant gave a mighty roar that shook the mountain wall. Caroline yelled, "Para en ras!" Then she ran down the path with her father, who was soon gasping for air. When they stopped a good way from the falling rocks, he took deep breaths. "I can't believe it! The amber giant is awake!" Dad hugged her. He was so excited. "This is a wonderful moment." Caroline looked down at the doll. It had a face and seemed to be asleep. "Can you see this?" She showed her dad the doll. "Your doll? Of course." Her dad scanned the path they had just run down, but the giant hadn't followed. "No, its face! Don't you see?" Caroline grinned, the cold air stinging her gums. "She didn't die." "I don't see a face," Dad said. She was about to wake the doll up when strong footsteps shook the rocks around them. A huge figure appeared on the path. Caroline felt its heavy steps as it moved towards them. Her heart beat quick as a clock gone crazy. "Dad, maybe we should run." Caroline pulled at her dad's hand, but he only stared at the giant. "No, I want to talk to him," Dad said. Caroline slipped behind her dad. The giant's hands were big enough to crush them both. Its feet crunched rocks and turned them into dust. "Parate juru," her dad shouted to the giant. "Welcome, friends." Caroline wrinkled her nose. The giant smelled of old leather and wet dog, and it looked like it could step on them and crush them. Caroline held her father's hand. The giant kneeled down. It bent its head to look at her dad. Despite the cold, Caroline started to sweat when it peered around her dad to see her. Caroline's heart pounded harder when the giant met her eye. "Brave explorers will keep exploring," she whispered to herself. The giant's brow was big and bumpy. It had a lot of hair on its cheeks and chin, and its eyes were dark brown, just like in her dream. Only they weren't kind eyes. They were hard and a little mean. "Caroline!" The giant's voice was so loud she wanted to cover her ears. Caroline blinked. She tried to speak, but no words came out. "At your service," the giant roared. Then he bowed. "You speak English?" Her dad was astonished. "How can this be?" "Ask her." The giant pointed to Caroline. Too surprised to talk, Caroline could only wonder in amazement. This enormous creature, apparently, was at her service. What on earth was she going to do with her very own giants? Well, that was a twist, wasn't it? Are we ready for chapter 9? Okay, chapter 9. "That which is lifeless has life," Caroline said for the third time, but the doll did not open its eyes. Her dad and the giant stood next to her in the snow and watched. Dad was quite tall, but he barely came up to the giant's hairy knees. "Pemba," she rubbed her arms for warmth. "What?" Her father was in his most serious and grumpy mood. He had tried to ask the giant questions about life 1,000 years ago, but the creature didn't remember anything. "Well, maybe our guide will know what to do," Caroline's teeth chattered. "I just can't understand why the giant speaks modern-day English." Dad was lost in his own thoughts and stared at the creature's face high above his own. "I speak English," the giant shouted. Then he pointed a hairy finger at Caroline. "She speaks English." Dad rolled his eyes. "Clearly. Tell me, how many people lived in these mountains before you slept?" "People lived here," Yes, mountains like this. The giant grinned, showing his fangs, and looked around the peaks fondly. Her dad slapped his head with his hand. All that study for nothing. We will learn nothing about the past through this creature. I should never have come to wake him. The giant's eyes narrowed. Not wake me? It's not his fault that he doesn't remember, Caroline said. Without thinking, she petted the amber giant's huge, furry hands. Clouds of dust rose into the air, and she wiped her glove on a rock. Ick, Caroline held her nose. You should take a bath. Bath! Your wish is my command. The amber giant jumped to his feet, causing a small landslide. Hey, where are you going? Caroline yelled up to the giant as she held on to her dad's arm. To find a lake. The giant stomped off. Both Caroline and her father lost their balance and fell on the cold, icy rocks. Ouch! Caroline rubbed her left arm and leg. Even with long underwear and thick wool pants, the fall hurts. He'll do anything you say? Her father's mouth hung open. I guess so, Caroline shrugged, though I don't know why. It must have something to do with the doll, Dad said. I think you're right, Caroline. We should find out what Pemba knows. They walked quickly back to the tents. The only lake her dad knew of was 100 miles away, so who knew when the giant would return? When they reached their little camp, Pemba scowled at them. Giant walks. Rock slide starts, Pemba said. Bad news, a giant in these mountains. We are not safe. It was foolish to wake it. Their guide crossed his arms and frowned at her dad. But the creature does as my daughter asks, her dad said. Then he unzipped the orange tent and pulled out binoculars to scan the mountains. What? How can this be? Pemba peered at Caroline, his brow furrowed. We hoped you would know, Pemba, her dad said. Caroline, show him the doll. She passed him the stone doll. The guide took his glove off and held the figure. Yes, it is warm. This is an important doll. Pemba held it close to his eyes. I heard you call out words when the giant woke up, her dad said to Caroline. Then he scanned the rocky landscape. There was still no sign of the hairy giant. Para en ras, Caroline said. The doll told me to say it. Caroline clapped her gloves together. She hated standing around. It made her so cold. It means you are bound to me, Pemba explained. He handed her the thermos of buttery tea. Caroline gratefully poured herself a cup of the thick, hot liquid. It tasted sweeter every time she drank it. Clever girl, Pemba grinned. We can kill the giant. First we must destroy the doll. Then he will be weak. No, Caroline and her dad shouted at the same time. The doll is my friend. Caroline tried to take the stone figure back, and the giant hasn't done anything wrong. We can't just destroy a relic from 1,000 years ago, her dad said. There is much we can learn. Her father also tried to grab the doll, unsuccessfully. Pemba shook his head and tucked the doll into his own pocket. That giant killed whole villages long ago, Pemba told them. What was life like 1,000 years ago, you ask? Just like it is now. Mountains stood here. Families lived and died. People ate, fought, and laughed. But 1,000 years ago, a giant lived here with an evil master. He killed hundreds of people. Luckily, a witch made him sleep. Until now. Caroline and her dad exchanged a look. Why didn't you tell me this before? Her dad rubbed his forehead. We could have at least brought a tranquilizer. I told you to forget about the giant, Pemba said. You should have listened. Caroline hated hearing grown-ups fight. She finished the tea with a loud slurp. We will go back to Kathmandu now, Pemba said. We will gather the other Sherpas, then we will hunt the giant. But he's a good giant, Caroline shouted. He won't hurt anyone. No, little one. This giant is bad, Pemba told her. He started to dismantle the tents, a big frown on his face. Dad, what if the giant comes back? Caroline scanned the snow and rock landscape in the distance. We have to warn him. We're running out of food, Dad said, and you've been shivering for the last 2 hours. It's too cold for you up here. We have no choice but to go with Pemba. The mountains were empty. There was no sign of the amber giant, and there was no way to warn him. Okay, I'll see you in the next video for chapters 10, 11, and 12. Bye!